Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Maximizing Efficiency in Your Community, 5 Areas of Untapped Savings. My name is McKinley Thompson, and I am the Senior Living Marketing Specialist here at Zeus Solutions, and we're really excited to bring to you today this presentation with David Richardson, who is our Senior Consultant for Senior Living, and 2 really great client panelists who are going to be sharing their experience and best practices. Before we go ahead and get started, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping announcements. Just to let everyone know, the phone lines have been muted, but please submit your questions as you have them. There is a chat feature in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, and you can submit those throughout the program as you have them. We will have a Q&A session at the end. If we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you directly afterwards, and we will send you a copy of the slides and recording 24 hours at this event's conclusion. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to David Richardson. As I mentioned, he's the Senior Consultant for Senior Living and works with all of our communities. He's worked with the Works Hub since its launch 7 years ago, and he's going to go ahead and kick it over and introduce our panelists. So David?
Thanks, McKinley. I'm just really happy that we've got 2 people that I've worked with for a number of years. John Burke, who's the Corporate Director of Safety at Human Goods. We've worked together for 3 years and has a lot of insight here, and I think you'll be really excited to hear some of the changes they've made and maybe take some suggestions away. If you haven't heard of Human Good, it is a not-for-profit organization with 18 CCRC communities across California, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, and Washington. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, thank you, David. Well, I've been in facilities management and safety management for over 45 years, mostly in acute care. I've worked on manufacturing as well as the educational area, and I've been in California now for about 12 years and working here with what used to be American Baptist Homes of the West, which is now Human Good, as their newly appointed corporate safety director.
Thanks. And Keith Tagg has been with Pathway to Living for the last 2 years. We've been working with Pathways even longer than that, 5 years with Pathways and the Works Hub. Pathway to Living is a for-profit IL and AL chain in 4 states with 22 communities and 28 buildings. And one of the really interesting things I think we're going to see today is there's some really kind of key similarities that we're going to find between these different types of communities, as well as some differences. So in terms of strategies to find efficiencies because of the different styles of communities that they have and the different types of organizations that they are. Keith, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, thank you, David, and very similar to John's. I've also been in the facilities and manufacturing background for over 40 years. I've been 2 years here at Pathway, as you mentioned, but I've also had healthcare, education, and commercial real estate facilities background, in addition to a number of years in manufacturing of different types of products. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Keith. And so you can see we've got a lot of knowledge here that we're going to be able to share today. Our agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to talk, and I'm going to talk specifically a little bit about defining what do we mean by operational efficiency and what are we looking at. There's really these 5 elements that we focused on, and if you've seen any of our emails come out, you'll know those 5 are assets, energy, contractors, staff, and budget. 5 key areas we find that if we can really find efficiencies there, the communities can work really well and provide the best service to their residents. At the end, as McKinley mentioned, we'll also have a question period as well. I really want to define our terms today, and as we've had these conversations over the last couple of months about efficiency and productivity, we really kind of found that there was a lot of people who used the terms interchangeably and included the word effectiveness as well, and we really kind of wanted to break those apart and separate that from what we're talking about, which is operational efficiency. So when we're talking about effectiveness, that really talks about doing the right things, and by doing the right things, what I mean is if you can be the most productive, most efficient organization, but if you're not doing the right work, if you are building building factories instead of maintaining your residence stuff, that's not going to help anything. So we have to make sure we're doing the right things. Efficiency and productivity are really two sides of the same coin. And the idea is with efficiency is doing the same with less. It's a measure of input. So if we put in, if we go the same distance in a car, you talk about the more efficient car being the one that used less gas. The measure of productivity is the exact opposite. It's a measure of output. So it's doing more with the same. So that's why it's the same side of the opposite coin. So in that case, that would be saying, we have two light bulbs. They burn the same amount of energy, but one burns brighter. So it's more productive with the electricity that it has. Its inputs are being used more efficiently, effectively. But what we're talking about here is kind of a grouping of all of that. Operational efficiency takes all of the individual those individual portions and brings it together. And so what we're really discussing today is, and what we're defining this as, is providing a high-quality resident experience in the most cost-effective and timely manner, using these terms of effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. And you're going to hear examples of each of those as we ask our questions. At least we hope so. Our 5 elements really break down, and again, for us being in the senior living community, we really have to kind of dial everything back to our residents. Our residents are our core reason for being. So our assets is one of the most important. That's the equipment, that's the buildings, that's how we look after our residents. We house our residents. Energy is making those assets run. If we can't power things, if we can't put gas into the generator, we are not going to be able to make sure that our buildings are effectively operating for our residents. So how do we most effectively use the energy that we consume? Contractors, we need to have outside experts. No organization has the ability to hire every single expert full-time. So managing your contractors, to fix your assets, to maintain your assets is a very important part of how communities work. And so what we want to do here is make sure that our contractors are the right ones, we have a good policy to manage them, and that we have some strategies engaged to make sure that we're reviewing that. Staff members are the ones who are there all the time for our residents. These are the ones that the residents see day to day. They do the daily maintenance, they change the filters typically, they change those light bulbs, plunge those toilets. If we don't manage and give the good use of their time, make sure that they're being productive and efficient with the time that they have, and effective, again, going back to knowing that they're doing the right work and not just doing work, is very important. And finally, all of this, of course, ramps back to being cost-effective, managing that budget, knowing what's coming up, making sure that we are staying in business for our residents. If we have to close, our residents have to move. Nobody's happy with that result. So the budget is the bottom line to making sure that we're staying in business. So where we're going to start today is element number 1, the efficient asset management, and some elements there. The first thing, and you're going to start to see a trend as we look through all of this, is having a listing of your assets so that you easily know what you own is probably the first step to being efficient. If you don't know what you own, if you don't know how old it is, if you don't know what you're doing to it in terms of your PM setup, it's very difficult to efficiently manage what you have. So one of the first things you're going to see, and across all of this, is data is key. Knowing what you have, knowing how you manage, knowing what work orders we have to do as we start getting into staffing contractors is a key part to managing what we're doing. So what does that mean? Well, PMs are set up, and not just having them remind you, but having those detailed instructions so that you get the most life out of your assets. That's a key part of being efficient with those assets, is that extending the life, making sure we're looking after things. We want records of repair so we can better make repair and replace decisions. What does that mean? Well, if I put $50,000 into a $75,000 boiler, do I want to throw more bad money after good? And finally, warranty tracking. This is something that if I've come on site to your site, you would have heard me talk about. I'm really passionate about this. We see so many clients who don't use the warranties that they're provided. They're using their operations budget to pay for repairs on their assets that are still under warranty because they aren't tracking that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to kind of throw this over to Keith and John, and I've got a couple of questions for them. Keith, your communities are a little bit younger than most. I think your oldest community is about 15 or 17 years. And I know that now you're kind of getting into that part where they're starting to feel their age. So collecting your assets has become a high priority, and making sure that you know how you're managing it is a higher priority. Can you explain what your focus is for the next year and how you see that will benefit Pathway?
Oh, yes, certainly, David. Thank you. So we are, as you mentioned, we have a combination of what I'll call our legacy communities, and also in the time that I've been on board, a couple of years, we've almost doubled in size, so we have new ones as well. So with the older communities, obviously we have the age-old problem of stuff starting to run to the end of its useful life. So understanding what that useful life is, understanding whether it's time to repair, replace, and so there's a whole evaluation in terms of just what is important, setting those priorities on what to fix, what to replace, and when it's ready to replace. At the same time, on the other end, with the brand new communities, is making sure have we documented and have we identified all of the things that really we should be tracking. So we got a lot on our plate in that regard.
Absolutely. And Keith, can you maybe explain a little bit about how you make those decisions? What are the guidelines that you have in terms of repairing versus replacing your assets? And do you have any guidelines that you follow there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for example, and I think most of your listeners will probably appreciate the fact that there are certain things that you run to fail. Exhaust fans, for example. There are certain items that have control boards and stuff in there that sometimes can be half the cost of the piece of equipment. So if you have an item that's less than $1,000, chances are you replace it. You don't try to fix it. There's other items that if you can replace, extend the useful life by an appreciable amount of time for less than half the cost of the investment, like for example in an air handling unit or something like that, you make those decisions. But ultimately, it all boils down to the overall valuation. And I think you addressed this when your opening comments. Making those efficient type of decisions as far as how you best value your dollar.
And the key thing there being is that you're tracking those devices. You can't make those decisions without understanding what you own and when you've made those decisions. And I think that's a really important part to note is for Keith to make those decisions, he knows and he is now tracking and making sure that the new communities are tracking as well the assets that they own. John, absolutely. Like Keith, I mean, a lot of your sites have been collected, have their assets collected. You've got a lot of legacy sites. How has that helped your sites? I know that you mentioned before when we've talked that you see a big difference between the sites that have completed the process and the ones that have not.
Yeah, we're in the process right now, David. With the affiliation with B Group, I've just rolled that process out to those organizations, and they're beginning to roll their information into the system. So where we had the legacy have-how communities, we started over 3 years ago with the process of downloading all of the assets and getting the information listed for each one of those. And like Keith had talked about, the equipment was run to fail. Well, their policy was run to fail, resurrect it, run to fail, resurrect it. And consequently, when it was beyond bringing it back, they would just forget, never replace the equipment. So we started with a concerted effort in our infrastructure to begin working with the assets that we had at the communities, get those listed, get an assessment done, and start to prioritize through the system by the listing of the frequency of failure, what assets really needed to be attended to at first. And most of the organizations, our communities, have done very, very well with that. I remember our emergency budget the first year I came in with what we call our CapEx process was substantial. Well, we've been able to reduce that considerably, and I would say that we've really reduced the emergency replacements of up to 60% over the last 3 years, because we've been able to predict the failures and begin to prioritize their replacements.
And that's great. And I know you just recently at one of your communities had a great success. Can you tell us what that was and what you think led to that?
Well, what we were able to do, through the capital process, was we've taken a focused approach on again, as I talked about, on the infrastructure, and to get our understanding of what the needs were. And by producing the notes and the information that was required to provide to our CFO, we were able to get the financing through to get these things done.
Yeah, and what about that survey you had at Los Gatos?
Oh, we recently had a CDPH and life safety survey, and on the life safety survey we had 0 deficiencies. Really went extremely well, and we attribute a lot of that to the processes that we've been able to roll in as far as compliance into WorkSub and managing that documentation through that.
That's great. And I think one of the things that we can see where there's some differences and some similarities between the way Pathway is managing this and the way that Human Good is managing this, in that Pathways has newer communities. They are and they're trying to collect the data on the newer communities, versus ABHA, or I guess now Human Good, as they've merged with B Group, has to kind of collect that with legacy communities, people who've been around for a while, and the different challenges that they have there. But the fact is that by collecting that information, by tracking it, we've seen, you can see with John, reducing the emergency expenditures budget by up to 60% can really change how that works. So what we're going to talk about next is our second factor, energy. And there's a number of different factors, and everyone talks about energy efficiency. Everyone immediately goes to green energy or solar or all this stuff, but that's not what it all is about. There's also the fact that we have smart building systems. We have energy conservation measures. We can do our own energy generation for sure, and also energy contract management. There are a number of ways that we can be efficient with our energy budget and our energy usage. So what we have to do is find the right balance there. And the key, and I think you're going to start to see this trend, is tracking. How do we know what we're using, and how do we make sure that overall we have the right plan in place? Are we getting the best bang for our buck on where we use our energy? This can take a number of different things, and I know with Pathway, they've taken a very specific route. So Keith, maybe you can talk about how your sites, your sites sometimes are HUD-based. They don't have the financing to do some of those energy retrofits and energy conservation measures, but you still have come up with a way to kind of manage and keep your energy costs predictable. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yes. So one of the things that we have in our portfolio is the benefit of a large number of ours are all located in the same power distribution area. So for power generation, and so therefore we're able to buy our utilities, gas and electric, in bulk. In other words, we combine all of our communities under one single contract, and we can set our supplies and buy in the future. So we can take advantage of pricing that is not unpredictable. So we can avoid some of those swings of heavy demands in the spring and the summer and the winter times when you've got air conditioning on in the summertime or you've got the heating on in the winter. By doing that, then we reduce the overall cost. Now, as you mentioned, David, a lot of our communities are fairly new. Some of the newer ones coming on, and of course, architects today are doing a lot of the energy conservation measures. So we obviously benefit from that. but just where our bulk, I guess, attention or our focus of attention has been on trying to reduce the overall cost of supply for our communities.
And that's great. And Keith, with your older buildings and the newer ones, are you seeing a difference in the amount of maintenance costs in the newer systems? I know we've talked to some people, and they've said that they complain their newer equipment has more parts, it's more prone to breakage. So while it may be more efficient, it costs more to maintain. While that cost may still be lower, it takes up the time, and that may not be reflected. Are you been experiencing that, or are you finding that your new buildings are about the same as your older buildings?
Yeah, I would say that's our experience. We're not seeing anything that I would say uniquely challenging with new construction, and I think the things that we do see are not things that are not unusual or normal that you wouldn't see at other places. So I would say on balance, we don't see any significant change in maintenance costs from one to the other.
Perfect. What kind of devices are you seeing most commonly implemented? Are you seeing that in lighting? Are you seeing it in heating across the board? What are the kind of core features that you're seeing in the energy efficiency?
Well, in the lighting area, there's lighting controllers with LEDs. We have variable frequency drives on our pumps, for the distribution. We have mixing valves and things, for temperature control and so basically just those common, I'll call them smart packages, but with controls that can read and pay attention to outputs and inputs and make changes automatically, so you're not tracking those.
Excellent. And John, you guys are also part of a corporate deal for power, but yours is a little bit differently structured. What's that program you're part of in California? John? Uh-oh.
Sorry, had it muted.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So anyway, we partner with a brokerage group here in California. And one of the things that we discovered in cooperation with them was a program called CARE. And that CARE program is a program that PG&E has that allows you to do medical purposes to reduce your overall costs between electric and gas. We were able to take advantage of a 20% reduction with PG&E. And right now, year to date for the period that we began in 2017, we're seeing about a $600,000 overall reduction organizationally for our utility costs, both in gas and in electric for those sites that are participating in the program.
That's huge. And what were the criteria for joining that program?
You had to be Medi-Cal, Medicare participant. You had to provide on-site care for those residents, and you had to also be associated with under the licensure of CDPH.
Oh, okay. But you guys aren't just relying on that. You guys are, I'm going to say, putting your money where your name is, i.e. human goods. You recently launched a pilot project with some solar panels. How did that come about?
Well, when I first came on board, we started to focus on overall operations and facilities management. And through that, energy savings are paramount. So we were in the process of a redevelopment at a community in Los Altos, which is near Mountain View, which is Facebook, Google, and all those things for people that don't know where that is. The decision was made to pilot a solar program. So we began to do our due diligence and seek out an organization to work with, and they finally settled on one group. They came in and worked with the design folks while the redevelopment process was working so that we could get certain aspects of roof trusses set up so the panels would be able to be laid up there. It was not what they call an OSHPOD project. This was in the independent living area. So it was kind of a win-win for us. The residents love those kinds of things here, and they feel that we're doing our sustainability due diligence, and also corporately, it's been a benefit to us in cost reduction. The panels have just come online here about 5 months ago, so unfortunately, I don't have specific data that I could speak to in regards to overall savings, but I do know that we are below budget and we are seeing reduced costs through our pro forma that was established when we opened the community. And we're also beginning to explore the potential to move ahead into 3 other communities in the state.
Wow, those are some really neat things that we can look at. So, on both sides, and similarities, looking for programs, looking for ways to decrease the overall cost. So, not just accepting the rates that you're given, and then looking at your other ways, energy conservation measures by making sure new buildings have the smart systems in place. Energy generation where possible, and that energy generation doesn't have to be used when it's generated. With batteries, you can use that to mitigate your grid power peak charges. So for high power times for places that's an issue. So really seeing a number of ways that communities are starting to address these things and making sure that those are implemented. The next part that we looked at, our third factor, is our contractors. And this is a place where a lot of people don't really, when we talk about efficient use of contractors, there's a number of different factors that we have to take into account. The first is, how are we tracking how much work they're doing for us and what are their costs? Are we making the right decisions between maintaining FTEs and maintaining contractors? So we've had situations, not with either of the people on the phone, where they realized that they were spending 2 or 3 times the amount on HVAC contractors that they were having if they just hired someone full-time to be part of the community. So there are times where that's the right decision, and there's times where the other things are the right decision. If you don't have a lot of use, if you just need to hire the expertise occasionally. When you do need them, though, that's not the time to be looking for them. So we can also be efficient in making sure that we are prepared when we need to use them, having the right contracts in place and monitoring those contracts, making sure that you know when they're going to expire, making sure that you've got all of your risk management in place in terms of certificates of insurance and factors in that. And finally, making sure that they're coming on when they're supposed to. Is Simplex showing up to track your fire safety notices when they're supposed to? So making sure it's not just your own work that's tracked as PMs, but making sure your contractor work pops up as well so that you can manage that and make sure they show up when they're supposed to. It reduces the amount of time you have to spend managing them. It's all there for you. So what I'm going to do is, John, how do you split your work between full-time employees and contractors? What's Human Goods' strategy there?
Well, it's kind of a multifaceted approach. Like you spoke about the compliance piece. We really don't want our techs doing compliance work. The liability and the litigiousness of just where we live in our state of our country at this point is very concerning, and we want to make sure that we're covered. So a lot of the compliance work we outsource. And like you said, we're generating work requests to make sure that our sprinkler work is done when it's supposed to be. Our sensitivity testing on our smoke detectors are done in accordance with the schedule. And we have that documentation, and we generate those work orders well in advance that go out to our contractors. Now, using tradesmen and folks within our communities, such as HVAC techs and electricians, highly capable carpenters, we don't have the financial resources, or the organization's focus is not in that arena. So we have to rely on outsourcing those kinds of things, especially when we're doing turnovers in our apartments, when we're making repairs to cooling towers, to our chillers, compressors, and so forth, our refrigeration equipment. So those are things where we turn over to other folks. Our guys, we want to make sure that we understand everybody's capabilities and how they're able to utilize those capabilities and work with particular work orders on a day-to-day basis.
Great. So, one of the things that we're seeing is a trend to kind of bring people back in-house. You kind of get that ebb and flow of, oh, we're going all contractors, oh, we're bringing everyone back in-house. So you really feel that right now you kind of are in a nice balance. You have the in-house expertise where needed, but outsourced to make sure, and it's a really good point on the litigiousness, like making sure that compliance is held by someone who will manage that risk for you and has the expertise there. So, are there places, though, where you might feel that like painting, for example, is one we're seeing brought in-house a lot. You do a lot of turnovers for your sites. Is that something that you might feel you bring in-house in the future, or are you still thinking of leaving that outsourced?
I would say, David, at this point, we're probably about 50% where 50% of the communities have painters. And when I say that, those are the larger communities. So they have dedicated individuals that are skilled in painting and that kind of work. Now, we don't always use them for 100% for all painting projects because you want to be aware of their volume of work, their ability to meet the demands that we have currently, and what our current priorities are to be sure that we're able to get that work done. So, we do invest in particular FTE needs and do have painters on site.
So it's really a size of site thing where you're seeing that makes sense. And that makes a lot of sense. If you don't have as many painting jobs, a full-time painter may not make sense. And Keith, on your side, I know you've come up with a very similar situation, that balance of a high use of contractors for some things versus also having some people on site for the day-to-day stuff. How do you make sure that you're tracking and making sure costs for contractors aren't getting out of hand?
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, we mirror very closely the same strategy that John does, and that is that we have essentially maybe one, possibly two, with maintenance manager and with a maintenance tech at any of our communities, and sometimes that's dependent upon what the occupancy is. And so the challenge there is having the right people in place that are proficient enough in, and I call it generalist, proficient enough in all the basic skills, but not necessarily expert in any particular area. And then that is supplemented by the outside contractors. For most of our communities, we would probably have in place at least two, what I would call qualified contractors for each specific or large discipline. So for those items, for example, that may be not contracted, like general plumbing or general electrical service, we would have two qualified contractors. Other items like your sprinkler systems, your fire alarm panels and devices, you would have contracted resources. And to John's point, we too would use outside resources for compliance type of measures, just that we don't want to have the internal aspect. So, that balance of having, the on-site, what I would call minimal staff. I've never heard any of our communities say they were overstaffed with maintenance people. So, the fact that we run a fairly lean operation supplemented with outside resources has proven to be, quite effective for us.
Now, one of the things that can happen when you use a lot of contractors versus regular FTEs is that sometimes impacts your resident satisfaction. They're seeing strangers in the apartment versus someone who's known, especially with seniors. They like seeing that. Have you found that that's impacted resident satisfaction at all, or you're able to kind of manage that with with having people who are there? How does that work for you?
For us, in general, most of that specific type of work where we would utilize outside contractors is not in the resident apartment. It would be primarily in the back of the house, what I call infrastructure, in the machine rooms, on the roof, outside. So outside contractors generally don't have a lot of what I would call personal or one-on-one type association with our residents. It would be more or less a rare type of occurrence when we actually had any kind of measured direct contact with the outside contractors.
So you're finding that there's a great balance. And there's a great example of where two very different styles of communities have actually kind of come together and found a really good balance. And that's something that I found interesting. I was expecting before this call that we would have seen a bit of a difference there with larger CCRCs having more staff and Keith, you ending up where you are. But even here, we're seeing that similar strategies are working in both sizes of community, and I think that's really interesting, and really nicely leads into our next topic, which is our fourth factor, which is staff. How do we get the most from the staff that we do have, those generalists on staff who are going to be working with our residents? And there's really, again, coming back to that data tracking, making sure we know what's going on. Do we have a work order time tracking policy? Have we provided the right tools so that our staff members can make the best use of their time, can make the best use, minimize travel time, and really make sure that they know about who are they walking into? Are we giving them an efficient way to know about the residents and the residents' preferences? Don't let the cat out of the room, those sorts of things. And finally, making sure they know what types of work to do when. Am I running back and forth between changing a filter and then going an emergency light bulb and then changing another filter, or am I able to batch my work together and plan with the people on site? If you've got both a maintenance manager and a technician, one person might be able to work with the reactive stuff versus somebody else working on PMs for a period. John, I'm going to start with you. You have some large sites with some large maintenance teams in place. How have you really tried to manage that? The staff to make sure that you're getting the work out that you need, in a way that you're still providing the resident satisfaction, i.e. this isn't a factory. We can't just rush in and out. We have to treat them as people because they are who we are looking after.
Sure. No, the residents are really the key that drives all this, and that resident satisfaction really is king in our organization today. So what we use are mobile devices. Primarily, they're the Apple iPods or iPads, the minis. So we really want the guys to have the ability to get in and work with their work orders and understand how the technology works for them. That being said, we also follow the metrics of everything that is done. So most of the communities right now, the large ones, are having morning meetings where they go over the priorities of the day, if anything has changed. And then they hit them up with the outstanding work orders where they're behind and where they need to focus on getting those done. And we also talk and review the current preventive maintenance work that needs to be done. We really strive to get above 90%. That's our goal for all the organizations. Most of them are near or above that, but we do have a few that are behind, but we're trying to work with them and getting that metric met. We have had some increased turnovers, within the teams, and that's also a problem because you've got to bring people up to speed. But the simplicity of the program and how the mobile devices are used is amazing, and the learning curve on these things is a very short period of time for them. We found really through the use of our mobile devices, I would say conservatively, our overall effectiveness in our work orders is increased at least 10% over the past 10 years through the use of WorkSub. Completion rates 3 years ago were probably in the 50, 60, low 70%. And today we're really seeing everybody in the high 80s, and we've got folks that are really in the mid-90s in their completion rates. It's really a huge win for us and the effectiveness and efficiency of the use of our team members, and it helps us support the need. As Keith was saying, nobody complains that we're overstaffed, but we want to make sure we're able to maintain what we have, and it helps us support with documentation the need for these individuals.
And that's pretty impressive. The improvement that you've seen. How has that changed the how your department's perceived in the community with both residents and staff? Are you finding that that's improving, or are you finding this is kind of a separation? They're no longer seeing as much of the staff members.
Well, no, there's still that hasn't changed. We're able to really increase significantly the residents' surveys in their satisfaction of both housekeeping and our maintenance folks. In fact, I would dare to say that primarily the housekeeping and maintenance departments score at the highest level of satisfaction within most of the communities. The complaints always used to be, all they're doing is standing around out there. Well, now they have these mobile devices. They're able to know what to do when the resident is not home, whether they're allowed to go into that particular apartment, work in that apartment or not. Is there a pet, those kinds of things. Then they also give them heads up as to any nuances that particular individual residents have.
That's amazing. And Keith, with your types of buildings, as you mentioned, you have small staffs, 1 or 2 people in most cases. While we just talked about how you have great contractors to fall back on, that adds costs. What's Pathway's staffing strategy? How do you stay on top of your workloads to make sure that work is getting done where possible by your staff?
Well, I would say in a large part of our strategy is what I would call basically avoid at all costs deferred maintenance. That the idea that you can just patch it and get by for a month or two and then have it happen to you again unexpectedly is not the best way to manage facilities. So fix it right the first time, give the appropriate level of resources, and then it saves you from having to take an unexpected call away from what you normally do later. Part of that too is we've also done like John has. We've added the mobile feature with the iPads so that we can get around better. But one thing we want to do also, back to your resident satisfaction, is that we want to make sure that our maintenance staff, our housekeeping staff members are actually spending time with the residents and are engaged with the residents when they are doing those repairs. It gives us an opportunity to develop a relationship with our residents, and so we look at our work order system and as our repairs as not just let's try to get it fixed as quick as we can and get in and out. Obviously, we have to do that to a certain extent because there's a lot to do, but at the same time, we don't want to minimize or discourage our team members from being able to engage with our residents.
And that's something that's really interesting, is efficiency is not always doing something the fastest, but it takes into the effectiveness part there. And I think that's a key part. Doing it right and doing the right thing. Spending time with the residents is part of a maintenance worker's job in a senior living community. And the fact is we need to be able to stay on top of that. And the final thing, of course, is our fifth factor, and where this all leads down to is budget. We have being efficient. Once we start being efficient with our assets, we start being efficient with our staffing and our contractors. Where we're going to see this all reflect is in the ability to be efficient in managing our budgets. Do we have the good data for effective reporting? Well, with all those sections above, if we're collecting all of that data that we talked about, this is where we can start to do some really good planning. Are you being able to continually maintain that capital forecast out? One of the big things we see happen at sites is that there's a scramble every year with the capital forecast, and maintenance managers kind of throw a number at a wall and go, well, maybe they'll give me X number of dollars next year, and they hope that they get it so they can fix a roof. But instead of doing that, knowing what you own, having a continuous tracking, so when you do a repair on something, it gets tracked in your system so that you know what's going on. And again, the final part is setting renovation standards. If you have a budget, you have to know how are we managing these things. And I know we only have a couple minutes here, so I'm not going to be able to go in as in depth as I would have liked to. But Keith, I want to start with you here. You talked about your buildings aging and your capital infrastructure. what's going on there? Do you have all the information you need, or is this a place that you still need to work on?
Well, we're still working on it. As we mentioned at the start, we have a combination of new and some that are getting older. But even the older ones that we have are just now entering into their time frame, when a lot of your assets that have 15 to 20-year time frames are just starting to appear. So we haven't had the benefit of having like a track record of using all of our data as a tool. So that's the process of getting there. And so part of what we need to do is take some time and go back and maybe reassess some of the areas that have been initially established years ago, and see, are they still right? Are they are we looking at some things that maybe need to be adjusted? But that's a fairly large job, I think, as most of your listeners will probably agree. And so finding the time to go in and actually do all that careful work is important, but it's also a challenge.
And I totally understand that. And John, I know you guys started that about a year ago, collecting that data. You have a couple of years. You got a 5-year plan to try to get this all under control. Can you talk about just give us a couple of minutes talking about how you guys are doing that right now?
Well, we actually worked with you guys to develop a tool for doing assessments, and it allows us to take. We try to go back at each community as far back as the records have, enabling us to evaluate the capital spend on our room turnovers, so that we can begin to predict, because that's our biggest, right now, the biggest financial nut that we have to manage. So what we're trying to do is gather up as much data as we can to predict out as far as 5 to 10 years what we're looking at as far as a capital outlay, and it'll begin to plan for those kinds of things. We already have been working on the infrastructure side, so we've got our arms around that, but where we lacked was the area to start to forecast into the future the dollars that would be necessary to manage those turnovers that would be coming our way.
And I think that's a really interesting thing, is really understanding with the budget where are our big, the low-hanging fruit that we can achieve. If we can see that we're doing so many renovations per year, that might be a really good opportunity to find that. It's really hard to save a lot of money on small budget items, but find the big budget items, track to see where those dollars are going, put a plan in place to control that dollars. And you can really start to see how those budgets can be efficiently maintained. So it's not a once-a-year thing. This is an ongoing management, because we're managing all of the other parts of the organization. Our assets are being managed, our contractors are being managed, our energy is being managed, our staff are being managed, and all that data can feed into an efficiently managed, ongoing managed budget. And just in some kind of conclusions, I hope you all see some of the big commonalities between these factors in really improving operational efficiency, what these two panelists here have been working on. And again, even sites with this level of resource and size are still working through things. So it doesn't matter if you're a one-off 100-bed skilled nursing community or a 500 resident CCRC or a chain. All of these things are an ongoing process, and we really hope that listening to some of the expertise that we really value here on the phone today was great. So I want to thank John and Keith for their time today, for their insights as to how they're managing stuff. And I'm going to turn this back over to McKinley. McKinley's going to put a brief poll up on the screen. And once we're done, we're going to open up for questions. We're going to answer the questions that have come through.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Keith and John, as well. This is all great information, and we already have a couple questions as y'all are answering the poll question on the screen. First, going back to the assets portion of our presentation, For one of our panelists, have you set a minimum dollar limit for what you enter into your system? And once you set that limit, how do you gather the data for input?
Yeah, so Keith, I'm going to turn this over to you. What's your minimum dollar value? I.e., do you put a $50 asset in, or what's your dollar value for putting an asset into the Works Hub?
Our basic is basically an outline. So we look at overall equipment. First of all, if it breaks, is it going to be a problem? So just like a quick example, you know, a PTAC, you know, or an air conditioning unit inside a resident apartment. That's important. So we would track that, even though, you know, depending on the style or size, you know, those things can range in cost anywhere from $600-700 up to if it's a vertical type unit, it could be, you know, $2,500. But that's the type of piece of equipment that you would look at. But very likely a refrigerator, you know, something that's for an apartment size refrigerator for a senior apartment that might be $750. That's basically going to run, and you know, you're not going to repair it. It's going to you're basically going to use it until it's done, and then you're going to replace it. You might want to just tag it, put it in there, put a 15-year life on it, and just know that, you know, at some point it's going to go in there, but you don't spend a lot of time doing PMs or anything like that for it. So typically $1,000 is a good place to kind of put a mark on. And again, those items though that are critical, like if you lost it, you're in trouble, you definitely want to put those on there, even if they're not at that $1,000 level. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I think those are two really good rules of thumb. There is a minimum limit, which is kind of $1,000, and the only reason you go under that is if it's a critical item. That's kind of the corollary to that original thing. $1,000 unless it's critical, and then we'll put it in as well. And John, do you have anything to add there?
No, I would concur with Keith in his assessment. It's pretty much what we follow. Along, you know, with the investments that we make with our appliances, we just want to know what the warranties are on them, the manufacturer, when they were installed, and if we're having trouble with them, you know, it'll pop up on the work order. So we do want to have that information at our disposal.
And that's important as well. Excellent. There's another question.
Sure. So for one of our panelists as well, does your bulk energy provider provide reports that track your usage to help you determine if your energy-saving projects are making an impact?
So, you know, Keith, I'll start with you again. I know you kind of have that bulk contract. Are you getting feedback on on your energy usage from the providers?
Yes, we do. Actually, we utilize a broker for our accounts, and so we get regular reports, and we have been trending, you know, favorably to the market. And as far as usage, you know, we actually have been trending in a positive direction, but for the most part, our positive trends have been toward the overall cost, the pricing of our commodity.
Excellent. John, on your case, are you getting any feedback? I know you had the feedback from your solar unit, but have you had feedback from from just the energy pricing from PG&E in terms of usage as well?
Well, like Keith, we have a broker, and he is providing us with the information per site, per utility, meaning the two, electric and gas. And it's keenly monitored now, especially with the care program. So we really want to, you know, it was one of those things, this is too good to believe and good to be true. And we wanted to make sure what they said was going to happen, and it's happening. So we're doing that.
That's amazing.
Sure. So the next question is, how do you train your staff and contractors who are working on site on interacting with residents?
So, John, maybe I'll start with you on this one. What kind of resident interaction training do you do in terms of how do you properly talk to a resident?
Well, it's similar to what we do with our team members. You know, they need to be respectful, they need to listen, and then they need to give them a response to whatever they're asking a question. Because you know, one of the biggest violators of this kind of action are our residents asking contractors for extra work, and it always pops up, and we have a policy that they have to clear through the facilities department any requests. So we want them to be respectful. We want them to respond with the appropriate terminology, and it's worked out very, very well. We have occasionally had an individual that has kind of not been as nice or sociable as we like, and we ask the contractor to find someone else to fill that slot.
And I think that's great. And I mean, you mentioned that just by having the information at your fingertips earlier, that you've had a really great response on the resident satisfaction and seen a large improvement there. Keith, do you have anything on your end that you do in terms of training for your maintenance staff?
John pretty much said it the way we pretty much do it. We do make the contractors sign in when they come in, so they really can't go anywhere until they're met at the front desk. So we do a lot of that interaction, or any kind of, like, for example, depending on where we're going, they may have to know the condition or what the situation is going in. So there's a little quick coaching there, but for the most part, John said it pretty much just exactly the way we do it.
Thanks.
Perfect. And the final question is, how do you make decisions on when to shift work from contractors to full-time employees? Is there a certain threshold that you hold yourself to, or how do you finally make that decision?
And John, I think this is probably for you, as Keith uses primarily contractors. John, how did you in the larger communities decide? Did you use data from the work hub? Did you just have it from contracts? What did you use to make that decision to hire those full-time painters?
Well, we use the ability of the current team to complete their work orders. So we're trying to get our work orders completed within a specific period of time. For us, it's really within a 72-hour period. If it's a big project and they're going to be, in there to do a significant quantity of work, obviously that makes the answer real easy. We go with the contractor. You got to evaluate the demands on your people, and you really have to be consistent in how you apply that with them, so that they don't get a sense that you're trying to take work away from them.
And that's great. Okay, so that was all the questions for today. John and Keith, I would like again to thank you for your time today and your insight. It's been really valuable. I would also like to thank everyone who attended. If you do have any follow-up questions, we'll pass those on to John and Keith as well, or answer them ourselves. And of course, in the next 24 hours, you'll be getting a copy of the presentation, a link to the presentation and the presentation itself. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Take care, David.
Take care. Thank you. Here we go. Bye.